Councilman Watkins has met twice with the grand jury and twice refused to divulge his sources. He says if he reveals the names of his sources, they'd be fired from the police department and their careers destroyed. He also claims that his information about the alleged beatings by police came as a result of an investigation he launched as a city councilman and feels he has governmental immunity. Judge Phelps disagrees and ordered Mr. Watkins to tell the grand jury what he knows. When the councilman refused to comply with the order, Judge Phelps found Mr. Watkins in contempt of court and fined him $500 a day until he reveals his sources to the grand jury. Councilman Watkins says there's only one way he'd do that.
Any one of them could release me from that commitment, and if they choose to release me from that commitment, I would disclose that person who undertakes such a release, but I wouldn't do it without their permission.
Councilman Watkins says he's also learned that a female member of the grand jury is allegedly leaking information from the secret proceedings to a member of the police department. Montgomery County District Attorney Jimmy Evans says the grand jury is trying to wrap up its investigation of the Todd Road incident, but can't complete its probe until Mr. Watkins complies with a court order. Mr. Evans says if there were beatings by police, the officers need to be prosecuted. Meanwhile, Mr. Watkins and his attorney have appealed today's order that continues to cost the councilman each day he remains silent. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The House and Senate have met in 27 of their 30 legislative days, and during that time, the House and Senate have agreed, passed, and sent to the governor about 3 dozen bills of statewide application, which is really just a drop in the bucket compared to what they're about to do. That assessment comes from looking at how the legislature has acted during the previous years. Here in the Secretary of State's office, they keep the journals for the House and the Senate. These 7 volumes right here represent the 1980 regular session. The first 4 volumes represent the work during the first 27 legislative days, which would have put them at the same point the current legislature is, with 3 legislative days left. It took 3 volumes to handle the work during the last 3 legislative days of the 1980 regular session. And so much happened on the 30th legislative days that the first half is contained in this volume, and everything that happened that afternoon and night takes up this entire volume. And by the way, this only represents what the Senate did. There's another set of volumes for the House. And this hectic pace of work on the last several legislative days often makes many people believe that the author of this observation, tacked on the press room door at the Capitol, once watched one of the last few legislative days. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
That one needs to stand a year, hoping to sensitize the hearts and conscience of the state of Alabama and the Attorney General's office.
We don't anticipate it drastically affecting our work. We anticipate being able to adequately maintain the roads of the county.
Councilman Watkins says 4 members of the Montgomery Police Department confirmed to him that the suspects in the Todd Road case were beaten by officers while at police headquarters. In today's hearing before Montgomery County Circuit Court Judge Joseph Phelps, Councilman Watkins told the judge he gained his information through an investigation he's conducting in his official capacity as a city councilman. Watkins is refusing to disclose the names of his sources to the grand jury on the grounds of governmental immunity. He says if he reveals the names of his sources, it would stop his investigation, and he'd be breaking a promise to his sources, who he says fear reprisals from supervisors if their names are made public. Mr. Watkins also alleges that the secret proceedings of the grand jury are not so secret.
As I indicated in court today, I had a report that grand jury matters, in fact, on Todd Road have not been secret, and there have been leaks from the grand jury to a specified person in the department, and that has given me some concern, and I've expressed it to the grand jury, but I can't identify the person who is leaking, because to do that would compromise the identity of one of my sources.
Montgomery County District Attorney Jimmy Evans says the grand jury's efforts of looking into the allegations of police beatings have been frustrated so far.
My position is quite simple. If a prosecutor knows, has evidence, and a grand jury knows and has evidence that police have beaten anybody, the police officer need to be indicted. And it's pretty hard to have a criminal case if you don't have any information.
Judge Phelps ruled it's not right to say something in a newspaper that demands an investigation and then not aid in that investigation, and ordered Councilman Watkins to reveal his sources to the grand jury. Mr. Watkins said he could not reveal the names and was fined $500 a day until he complies with a court order. Mr. Watkins' attorney says they are appealing the ruling by Judge Phelps. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
In other words, he's got to be able to demonstrate by clinical evidence this person is disabled, okay? Demonstrable. In other words, you can demonstrate it. He can prove it. It's not lay down and compare. The presumption that they're honorable people, that they have taken the Hippocratic Oath, and that there's a prejudice from a family physician, but rather that this type of physician, there's a presumption that they know more than some physician that the government has come along and designated to be, to my hypothetical case. It was a lady who...
First off, if we go see the president, I'm sure there's going to be some national media coverage on it, and this is what we need to spread this, because it desperately needs to spread to other states. And second off, the president realizes that it's the people that put him in office. And if he wants to stay another 4 years, he better start listening to what the people says.
What we want is what belongs to us. We're not asking for a handout. We worked out this, my husband worked 32 years and paid in Social Security, and now he's not able to work, so we want it.
In a decision made known this morning, Judge Hobbs also allowed 3 parties to join the class action lawsuit originally brought by 2 Montgomery men. Joining are Senator Larry Dixon of Montgomery, who says a Democratic primary is the only way he'll be able to stay in the Democratic Party. The state Republican Party, which claims a federal judge shouldn't tell political parties how to nominate candidates, and Tuskegee attorney Calvin Biggers, who's running for the state Senate. Earlier this month, Governor Wallace announced that September 27th would be the date for a special court-ordered legislative election, but he didn't call for primaries. State Democrats and Republicans alike say that that date won't allow time for primaries. But state GOP leaders have decided to conduct an open primary anyway and have asked the governor to change the election date. Judge Hobbs also set a Friday hearing on the suit before a 3-judge panel to hear more evidence in the case. The panel, made up of Judges Hobbs, Myron Thompson, and Frank Johnson, Jr., is the same one that approved the legislative reapportionment plan and ordered new elections this year. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse.
would also give us in the Southeastern Conference the ability to play everybody in the conference, and I think that's the only way that we'll ever have a true conference champion, is if we play a round-robin schedule and we play 9 conference games, and then we will have a true conference champion. Until that time, you know, we just name a champion because he won more SEC games than the other team. But it cannot be a fair conference championship right now because some of the teams don't play, let me say this, none of the teams play the same opponents in the conference. And it's, I'd like to see everybody play everybody else. Just roll it out there and see who's the best.
Retail and construction. These are the areas the report says are growing at the fastest pace. Why? Consumer confidence and anticipation. Confidence that the economy is turning around and that money is available. Anticipation that business is picking up and that there will be a need for newly produced goods. All this means that consumers are spending and charging more, beginning a welcome cycle of supply and demand for both retailers and manufacturers. The Center's forecast for real output, which is the state's equivalent of the gross national product, is predicted to grow at an annual rate of 4% in 1983 and 5.3% in '84. The report says that indicates Alabama will pull out of the recession faster than the rest of the country. The report goes on to say that while more Alabamians are going back to work, getting everyone back on the job and completely turning around the unemployment picture will take time. However, with the recovery of the steel production in the state, especially at the Fairfield plant near Birmingham, things should continue to improve. The only snag in this otherwise rosy forecast could be the national deficit. Officials at the Center for Business and Economic Research say the recovery hinges on Congress's ability to correct the growing national deficit and to keep inflation rates down. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
I think that we've developed a situation to where we can realistically have higher goals going into this year. So naturally our goals this year are to win a national championship. I don't think that that's anything necessarily that big or small or whatever, except that the top teams in the country, I would imagine, all are building their program and pointing their season toward competing for a national championship. And we certainly want to be considered in that group. I think that when you get into the top 10 teams in the country, certainly the top 4 or 5 teams in the country, there's very little difference in the caliber of athletes that are on the field. I think the difference comes in the having the winning edge and being able to put it all together and have a little luck along the way. I think we have an athlete at every position. We certainly got some areas where we don't have experience, but for the first time going into the season, I do think that we have an athlete.
When Mayor Thompson was arrested on the indictment last Friday, he'd been saying all along he was never convicted of a felony in 1971. He was right, according to records TV 12 obtained. Bay County, Florida Judge Robert McCreary sentenced Thompson to probation for 3 years on an aggravated assault charge. The way the law works, as it did in the case of Thompson, the judge sentences the violator to a probationary term. If that is completed without violations, the person ends up with no felony violations on his record. That's what happened in the case of Jerry Frank Thompson back in 1971. Mayor Thompson's attorney, William Dunn, said today he'd have no comment on the case until later this week. Elmore County District Attorney Glenn Curley says he wouldn't comment until his office completes research on the Florida law. So far, there is no information on what the future disposition of the Thompson indictment will be. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
$100, give or take $2 or $3. That's how much they actually use there.
The law ought to create a remedy for someone who has been wronged the way he has been. $5,000 worth of merchandise he's provided the state with and not gotten a single cent for it. And there ought to be a remedy, and that's why we're filing this suit.
I just think it's a real shame that any businessman can do business with the state of Alabama and make a contract with some person who is supposedly authorized to make contracts in the state, and then have that somewhere in midstream change so that I get taken in and the state gets theirs, but I don't get anything.
It's no secret the school funding crisis still exists in Macon County. $350,000 in bills hasn't been paid, and that doesn't include the bills for July.
So with school set to open next month, there's a lot of work that needs to be done right now. Work like school bus maintenance, painting, and plumbing, all of which costs money.
Acting School Superintendent Dr. L. Celeste Ferguson says they need more than just money.
In preparation for the opening of school, one of the gentlemen in the community has called and told me that he would be willing to get together a group of volunteers to donate labor and time so that we can get the buildings cleaned and make some minor repairs in the schools so that we will be able to open on August 25th.
At one point, educational officials were contemplating asking the State Board of Education for a 30-day extension to open schools. They won't need it now. The board has enough money to meet the August payroll, and it looks like there's enough cash to last through September. In the meantime, educators and politicians are counting on 4 revenue-generating sources: a 1% increase in sales taxes to bring in about $400,000 a year, a 10 mil ad valorem tax worth about $300,000, an occupational tax to generate $700,000, and a dog racing commission worth an estimated $1.5 million. All proposals have been turned down before, but there may not be a choice this time around. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. School officials are faced with an old problem that right now has a temporary solution: school funding. There's enough money to meet the August payroll, enabling school doors to open on time.
What about the months to come?
Well, I'm hoping that proration will decrease and we'll be able to have a little more money available.
Another old problem left unresolved is long-term funding of education in Macon County. The choices are increasing the local sales tax, that would generate $400,000 a year, raising ad valorem and occupational taxes, which would raise about $1 million, and approving a dog racing bill, generating about $1.5 million for the schools. But none of these proposals is popular with local residents. The one drawing the most attention right now is the dog racing bill. Reaction is mixed.
I'm from Connecticut originally, and a beautiful little town in Terryville, Connecticut was beautiful, clean, and safe until a dog track came. Now you don't know the town.
And I don't think it brings violence or anything in. I think it's more of a help than a handout. And I definitely will support it.
I really don't know, all the implications and things, for a small town. I really couldn't say.
I expect we'd have to. We don't have a choice here in Tuskegee. I personally would support it. And speaking for the business community, I just happen to be the president of the Chamber of Commerce. The business community has committed themselves to support the dog racing bill also, should it become law.
In the end, the future of education will be left up to the citizens of Macon County, who will decide in the upcoming election. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
The senator arrived in Montgomery around 3 this afternoon. He was met by several of his local supporters and by members of the governor's staff. From the airport on to a meeting with Governor Wallace and an announcement of a special proclamation.
This is John Glenn Day as far as Alabama's concerned.
The proclamation was a surprise birthday gift for the senator. He turned 62 yesterday. Glenn also talked with reporters on the question of the economy. Glenn says it's very unstable and current economic policies won't help matters.
I think it's an irresponsible policy where we have a 1/4 reduction in federal revenue and pay for it by going out and borrowing money back from the people and in effect transferring our responsibilities to our grandchildren. That's no economic policy.
And on the question of new taxes, Glenn says that may be a real possibility.
If we can't cut budget and we have to get a balanced budget over so many years, then there may well be the necessity to raise taxes. That's entirely possible. And so I'm not saying how we would do it, nor am I proposing it now. but we have to be realistic enough to know that that is one thing that may have to be done.
From the governor's office, Senator Glenn went on to meet with some of Montgomery's black leaders.
Democratic presidential hopeful John Glenn is back in Montgomery. The Ohio Democrat is winding his way through a full day of meetings and speeches. Lois Russell of our staff is with the Glenn campaign staffers. She's been with them today. She's now at the Democratic House for a live report. Been a full day, Lois.
That's right, Bob. As we've said before, it has been a full day of activities for the senator. Black leaders. Later, the senator appeared at a fundraiser at the Capitol City Club. As we said, Mr. Glenn is now meeting with some of his supporters here at the Democratic House. And at 7:30, he's to speak at the Farm Bureau Commodities meeting. We'll have more on that meeting and the senator's speech at 10. Bob?
Thanks a lot, Lois Russell, live at the Democratic House. The sports report with Phil Snow.
Roy Bailey says it was around noon when 3 carloads of women, olive-complected, Spanish-speaking gypsies pulled into his grocery store on Highway 80 just west of Montgomery.
We bought candy, combs, sugar, just little bitty items, you know, 35 to $1.
Mr. Bailey says while his wife was busy, a couple of the women walked through this door, leading from the store into their living area. He says they found a paper bag with the family's life savings, an estimated $40,000. Awful lot of money.
Definitely.
Your life savings?
Definitely.
Where does that leave you?
In a hole right now.
Mr. Bailey says it was about 15 minutes before anyone noticed an intrusion into their living area and called police.
And due to the time lapse, they had already passed through Selma when the statewide dispatch was put out and were last seen by the Greensboro State Troopers.
Spotting the cars helps some, but it doesn't help Roy Bailey from suffering from a nervous laugh.
Yes, sir.
When the reality of losing that much money sinks in. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Sure did. Weren't long at it.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Roy. I appreciate it.
Senator Glenn says farmers aren't getting a fair shake under the Reagan administration. He says where farmers used to be the backbone of the American economy, they are now having their backs broken by policies that are too nearsighted. Senator Glenn pointed to the payment in kind or PIC program as an example, saying it will probably be the most expensive farm program in history, costing some $32 billion. And he says that's not the worst of it.
In addition to being that expensive, PIC has been patently unfair to Southern producers in general and to cotton farmers in particular.
The senator also says the Reagan administration is short-sighted in its handling of other domestic matters such as education and unemployment. He says he has ideas aimed at the future.
I've recently announced a program to restore excellence in our schools. I believe it's the most complete program that has been put forward by anyone. And it's why I'll soon be introducing additional legislation to create a job training trust fund for workers in need of help. A trust fund that is a loan arrangement that then gets paid back in by some novel arrangements we feel.
The senator leaves Montgomery tonight for Huntsville and another full day of campaigning tomorrow. Lois Russell, WSFA TV News.
Now, you know Herman. Now the time comes when the matter can be cleared one way or the other, and you refuse to go to the grand jury, the only place where the case ought to have been tried or discussed, and you refuse to do so.
I think I'll apologize for anything I've done. I don't like to be in the kind of band I'm in, but I think inevitably we get to some points in life where we have to take a stand, where we have to commit ourselves to a principle.
Councilman Watkins' stand, or his refusal to name the police officers he says told him about the alleged beatings of black suspects, has him fighting in the courts and fighting in the council chambers. Yesterday, a circuit court judge found him in contempt of court for not cooperating with the grand jury. Today, the mayor challenged him to talk.
I pledge to this council and to this city that if he got anything to say, one way or the other, that whoever goes up and said it, for city employees, be no recriminations whatsoever.
But Mr. Watkins only renewed his pledge to protect what he called decent police officers, the ones who he says don't want to cover up what happened to the Todd Road suspects while they were in police custody.
Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
We appeal the case. We feel that we are correct all the way through, 100%. All I'm saying is, at most, according to the court's instructions to the lawyer, is that only there's no way to change district's position that the plan is passed by this council for a stay. But I believe that the council can.
Mr. Oliver to move over, which he could have moved over. He had plenty of land over there. But he said, no, I'm going to shift back and take this.
These toys bring smiles to the faces of little boys and girls who wouldn't ordinarily be visited by Santa Claus at Christmas. And this food quiets the rumbling stomachs of men without jobs or means of support. These toys and food are both donated, both sponsored by local agencies, different agencies, both geared to give. But what happens when these agencies overlap and duplicate services? Or what happens when you know of a need but don't know who to ask for help? Well, Good Sam is the answer. It's the brainchild of a group of local churchmen and women and other organizations to serve as a clearinghouse for all agencies in town for handing out money to the needy and keeping track of all the folks who receive the help. Good Sam will operate out of the Department of Pensions and Security and will take a lot of the burden of charity work off churches because they'll donate their money, clothes, food, and time to the Good Sam program. DPS will screen all potential recipients and for a while only give money. So far, no ceiling has been set on the amount each person or family can receive. Good Sam hopes to begin operating by the middle of September. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
In August of last year, Mike Arban pled guilty to violating the state ethics law and was fined $5,000. The charges came in connection with the purchase of an automobile by the school. In a meeting September 9th, the State Board of Education fired Mr. Arban as president of Nunley Tech College and directed two-year college chancellor Howard Gundy to take over administration of the school. On Monday of this week, Mike Arban went back to work with the state, but this time with the State Office of Employment and Training. He'll receive $32,000 a year as an assistant to Claude McCartney. His job was approved by top aide to Governor Wallace, Bill Rushton, who heads the State Department of Economic and Community Affairs. Mr. McCartney says the ethics law violation had been considered, but that Mr. Arban's contributions as a technical school president far outweighed the ethics violation. He says Mr. Arban will be going into the field and looking at job training programs that should be funded, but he says Mr. Arban won't be writing or awarding any grants. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
We had a 20% increase in the amount of the pledges this year over last year, and the national
Go ahead and move his old one out of the way.
Let's see that. We have the height, the same height. I believe those are a little higher. Can this come a little higher? You want the arm a little higher? Can it come a little higher?
Commissioner Smith says the four-man implementation committee was supposed to meet with him this morning, but after repeated delays, they decided not to attend.
As you see, they're absent. They can't make their minds up.
The commissioner says it was just another example of the committee dragging its feet and milking the state's taxpayers for money. It was also the last straw.
I'm ordering my attorneys by close of business today to petition the federal court to once and for all to give relief to the Department of Corrections, total relief from all the federal court orders.
Wasn't any meeting to show up for or not show up for. We were doing our job and everybody knew what the schedule was.
But committee members meeting all day across town with lawyers representing the state and prisoners say Mr. Smith knew they would not attend the meeting with him. And they say they're doing all they can to move along toward an agreement with all parties involved.
We are operating in the context of an adversary proceeding, a litigated case, where parties have taken different sides and have different points of view, and particularly different points of view on whether there's been compliance.
An attorney representing inmates in these meetings, John Carroll, strongly disagrees with Mr. Smith's argument that the state has complied with all the court orders against it.
The state is clearly not in compliance with very specific provisions of the court's order. I mean, that's just a plain and simple fact.
So while Commissioner Smith makes it very clear that he's tired of the federal court's involvement in Alabama's prisons, the committee members, at least for now, are making no predictions about when and if they too will want the courts out of the prisons. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. In recent weeks, State Prison Commissioner Fred Smith has been pushing to get Alabama's prisons out from under more than 10 years' worth of court orders for reform. But today, when he says he was supposed to meet with the members of the federal committee supervising those reforms, they did not attend. And Mr. Smith says the state will now petition the federal court to release the state from the reform orders.
This is a must. As you see, the four-man committee is not going to do it.
But committee members who did meet today with each other and attorneys involved in the prison suit say they will keep doing the job the court gave them, overseeing the reform of the prison system.
I think we are moving in the right direction. Commissioner Smith has done some excellent things in this prison system in moving toward compliance, but we're not going to be bound by any artificial deadlines.
All it is, people, is attorneys wanting to make money.
Now, I've been an officer of the federal court here for over 30 years, and I haven't milked any client yet, and I'm not going to start in this case.
Attorneys for both the state and inmates say they want federal court involvement in the prisons to end. But while the state says it's done all it can to meet court requirements, one plaintiff's attorney says that's not true, and the state is too impatient. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Nuclear war would be devastating. I'll tell you a few things that I've heard. I don't like to throw out figures because I haven't. Nor seek to make it more tolerable. Accurate weapons
is uniquely American, first introduced back in the early 40s into government in Georgetown University. If you go back and read, the church actually gets down and starts talking about the. Now we get the question is, why did the bishops want to start writing a letter on the war as far as morality is concerned? But it is also interesting to note
That all the people from CMS that work in the psychiatric ward. The third thing was segregation. They felt there were too many people being put in punitive segregation for too long. So if you recall, what we asked them to do is tell us specifically what to do. They told us what to do. We drew up our regulations per se what they had. They're absent. They can't make their minds up which way to go. Yesterday we delivered volumes to them because we knew that this is the inmates themselves. This is the inmates that have been bringing the writs against us. They say it's in compliance. The two experts who would left, two attorneys at the other end here that are absent. All it is, people, is attorneys wanting to make money.
Wanting muscles and having muscles are entirely different matters. Just ask Chuck Lynn. He's in the final stages of preparation for what will hopefully render him one of the top titles in bodybuilding, Mr. USA.
During the wintertime and stuff, I don't train as hard. I basically try to lift heavy weights and try to pump the muscle up, you know, to the biggest size it can get. And as the contest is approaching is when really the vigorous workouts come in. It's six weeks before a show, I guess, I'm working out 6 days a week, and so much more than that, running and the hard diet that you have to go through to lose every ounce of body fat is probably the toughest thing for me.
Chuck's been sculpting his massive body competitively for 7 years now, and he's had some success winning the 1978 Mr. Alabama title and the 1981 Mr. Mid-South. Chuck's been an athlete all his life, and he looked at bodybuilding as a way to stay competitively involved in sports.
Something inside me that just wants to excel and wants to be successful in something of a talent that God has given me. It's a personal thing to see if you do well in a contest that all the hard work and all the things that you've sacrificed, it makes it worthwhile.
Chuck hopes a Mr. USA title next weekend in Atlanta will help all this hard work and regimental training pay off.
I'm on schedule, yeah. I'm real pleased. I've been worried before in the past, you know, and just a nervous wreck and not thinking I'm getting cut up enough or losing too much muscle size or losing just too much weight in general. But right now I feel like I'm right on target. The competition is so tough. You have to be either a state or a regional champion just to qualify, so everyone is good. You know, you may think you look fantastic and not place well at all, but
Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
In 1980, former President Carter put an embargo on all grain exports to the Soviet Union, using food as a weapon to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Mr. Amstutz says that strategy backfired against farmers.
The Soviet Union is the single most important importing nation in the world. So when we embargoed our exports to the Soviet Union, we cut ourselves off from the single most important market. Plus, we invited our competing other nations to increase their production so that they could sell the Soviet Union, fill the void that we left. And so we've created much more competition for ourselves around the world, and that has had a depressing effect on prices.
At the time of the embargo, U.S. farmers were supplying 70% of the Soviets' grain needs. Today, that figure is down to 17%. But Mr. Amstutz is negotiating a long-term deal with the Soviets, now in hopes of picking up where farmers left off 3 years ago. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Consuming public does not appreciate the problems of agriculture having a supply of food. Yes, they have been some.
At the time of the embargo, we were supplying 70% of the Soviet needs. Currently, it's something like 17%. So we have lost 50% of that very important market.
The embargo was when?
Mrs. Adams is a concerned citizen who is active in the NAACP and numerous other organizations, and she's in the suit that the Mobile City, and based upon that, we believe that we will be successful with this litigation in this current city elections there, and to retain jurisdiction over the case until such time as the legislature, in conjunction with the city of Troy,
Commission on June the 28th, asking that they would deeply consider appropriating the city of Troy into single-member districts, thereby creating a mayor council or a manager council form of government. However, the commissioners refused to respond to the letter. And on
Have you ever run in any other political race before?
No, I haven't. However, there has been another black candidate prior to my running for the committee.
NAACP and numerous other organizations, a voice in their government.
Refused to yield to the request in any manner whatsoever.
Our suit calls for the federal court to enjoin the certification of any candidates in this current city elections there, and to retain jurisdiction over the case until such time as the legislature, in conjunction with the city of Troy, adopt a plan of government that complies with the requirements of the 14th and 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Throughout the country is a public outcry. An editor writing an editorial, a housewife or a student writing a... The same thing is going to happen with the busing and the integration and this consolidation. People see now, maybe they meant well for the last 20 years, but it's meant destruction of the schools, the lowering of test scores, and the lowering of the quality of education in Alabama and throughout the nation. As a lawyer for Stop the Equal Rights Amendment, I've been involved in cases from New Jersey to Louisiana. I represented the judge. Then there was such a... The same thing is going to happen with the busing and the integration and this consolidation. People see now, maybe they meant well for the last 20 years, but it's meant destruction of the schools, the lowering of test scores, and the lowering of the quality of education in Alabama and throughout the nation. This is the time. This is the power of patriotism and morality. Simply that people have lost control of their schools. They look at the school the same way as they pass the post office. It's just a order, or excuse me, rescind this consolidation order. Bring local control back to this legislature.
Consolidation. They're just ordering, making sure that black schools are getting what white schools have already had for many.
Dropping out of school, having lower standards, having poorer teachers, having quotas of unqualified teachers in school, and eventually having just a lower quality of education. This isn't a time in Alabama for judges whose robes are as black as their hearts to be running the schools of the state. The decision should be made here by our elected officials, and the tide is turning. Let Mr. Reagan know that the tide is also turning here in Alabama before it's too late and the schools have already lost their quality education.
stand by, please, and go ahead.
As a young legislator,
And go.
in Alabama, we know that when industry and government work together as partners for economic progress, good things happen.
It was a day of firsts for Mr. Wallace. It was his first ride in an F-4, and he's also the first civilian to fly in a 187th jet since it became a combat group. And it's that combat role that prompted his interest in flying the F-4.
But I'm very proud of these airplanes and these pilots. Major Mays is a tremendous pilot, and I want the people of Alabama to know what our capabilities are as an Air Guard unit, especially since the 187th Tactical Group has transferred to attack capabilities.
The pilot of the F-4, Major Scott Mays, says the unit wanted to give Mr. Wallace a taste of what fighter pilots go through.
We staged some mock aerial combat today. We had a wingman who simulated dogfighting against us and firing various missiles and making a gun attack on us. And then we had to retaliate, of course, and we attacked him, and Mr. Wallace was able to see just exactly what it does involve in an aerial combat engagement.
Orientation flights, like the one Mr. Wallace took today, are designed to give civilians and military leaders special insight into the role the Air Guard plays in the nation's defense. And Mr. Wallace plans to spread the word about the Guard during the speeches he makes around Alabama for his father and in his job with Troy State University. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
The law makes it illegal to have tinting on the windshield, side wing, or rear window that's too dark for the occupants to be easily recognized through the windows. That may sound simple, but just how dark is too dark? That's where the confusion comes in. State troopers say it's simple.
Well, one of the primary things that our troopers will be looking for will be the ability to recognize and identify the driver and the occupants in the vehicles that they will pass on the roadway or they will stop during a routine traffic stop.
However, the owner of a Montgomery business that installs tinting says the law leaves him and his customers in the dark on just what types of tinting are too dark to be acceptable.
We believe that if we had more distinct guidelines in the density of these films, we could have a better idea. But at this point, we don't know. We want to make sure that that we don't put a film on that the law wouldn't allow. We're concerned about that.
Mr. Moore says most customers install the tinting to decrease the amount of heat buildup in a vehicle. Even though the law is now in effect and tinting that's illegal must be removed, state troopers say they will only issue warning tickets from October through December. However, on January 1st, they'll be passing out the real thing to violators. Even out-of-state travelers passing through Alabama will be subject to tickets. Matt Carmack, WSFA TV News.
We, in conjunction with the enforcement unit out of EPA, visited the Alabama site and were able to confirm that the material was that which similar to other sites in Alabama, primarily Tuscumbia and other places. EPA then visited a site containing approximately 20 drums in Manchester, Georgia, and it was also the similar material which was found at other sites in Alabama.
Most of these kids may have a hard time remembering, but I can still picture number 10 pulling up for the long jumper or making the key steal in the heyday of the New York Knickerbockers. Well, that number 10 was Walt Frazier, and Clyde was in town today for the James Oliver Kevin Loader basketball camp at ASU.
Stiff, get off your elbow.
Frazier still looks like he could suit up and play with the best of them. After all, he was one of the best. During his 12-year career, he helped lead the Knicks to their finest days, which included 2 world championships in the early 70s. Clyde retired from the NBA in '79 and went to work as a sports agent. At first, he missed the playing time, but that soon passed as he got more involved as an agent. And it helps when one of your clients is Julius Erving.
But I feel it's the next best thing to plan because, like you said, it keeps me involved with the game, and I'm doing something that I know. You know, like I've been a player, so I can advise a lot of the guys not only on the court but off the court as well.
Frazier made quite a name for himself as a man about town in his playing days in the Big Apple. Fur coats and floppy hats were all a part of Walt's New York scene. But at age 38, that's now changed some.
No, I've come down now. I guess, like they say, with age, you mellow out, so I've sort of mellowed out. I still have those things, but I don't flaunt them like I used to, you know, because then I was 25 and, you know, I was really into the scene in New York.
Frazier says someday he may get back into the playing end of basketball. If his agent work ever gets tiring, he said he might try coaching. And it was obvious from the reactions of these kids at the Oliver Loader basketball camp that Clyde still has the touch. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Before I thought they were in trouble, but now since they made a few rules like a ceiling on salaries and hopefully a better TV contract, I think the game will come back. Before, like I say, even though I'm an agent, I think the salaries were hurting the game. The players were making all the money, the owners weren't. So now if they can sort of balance it out, you know, it's going to create more goodwill with the fans and I think create more balance in the league now that a team like New York or LA or Boston with a lot of money can't buy up all the superstars.
Environmental officials say between 30 and 50 drums of dangerous chemicals are buried in a rural residential area near Hackneyville in North Tallapoosa County. The other site is in Manchester, Georgia, which is in the Phoenix City, Columbus area. The material at both sites is believed to be similar to that found last year in a residential area of Goodwater and in the Coosa County landfill near Rockford a little more than a month ago. Buddy Cox of the Alabama Department of Environmental Management says the latest finds are the result of a continuing investigation by his agency, the EPA, and the Justice Department.
It appears that this is quite possibly the rest of the material based on information we have been able to secure. There may be one or two drums here or there, but I think this is quite possibly the last of it. We think right now that the total number which we have found is roughly equivalent to the total number which were produced, which is a total amount of 650 drums.
Meanwhile, the cleanup of about 120 drums of hazardous chemicals from the Coosa County landfill is stalled. State officials say complex procedures needed to recover the material and the weather have delayed the cleanup at Rockford. The 20 drums located in Manchester will also be cleaned up by the state of Alabama. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The latest report from the Federal Committee monitoring court-ordered changes in the prisons was taken to the federal courthouse this afternoon and given to District Judge Robert Varner. The report praises the state's efforts to relieve overcrowding and end the backlog of state prisoners in county jails. It also expresses the committee's optimism that the state is nearing or close to compliance in several other areas, among them providing better mental health care facilities for inmates, changing prison staffing requirements, and improving the educational, vocational, work, and recreation opportunities for prisoners who are being kept apart from other inmates in administrative segregation. The one area that drew the most attention in the committee's report deals with exactly how much space should be given to inmates living in prison dormitories. And on that issue, the report says attorneys representing both sides in the argument are working on an agreement. As for the future, the report says the committee is pleased to note that the need for its work has progressively diminished, but they don't think their work's over yet. They've scheduled their next meeting for October. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News at the Federal Courthouse. The latest report from the Federal Committee monitoring court-ordered changes in the prisons was taken to the federal courthouse this afternoon and given to District Judge Robert Varner. The report praises the state's efforts to relieve overcrowding and end the backlog of state prisoners in county jails. It also expresses the committee's optimism that the state is nearing or close to compliance in several other areas, among them providing better mental health care facilities for inmates, changing prison staffing requirements, and improving the educational, vocational, work, and recreation opportunities for prisoners who are being kept apart from other inmates in administrative segregation. The one area that drew the most attention in the committee's report deals with exactly how much space should be given to inmates living in prison dormitories. And on that issue, the report says attorneys representing both sides in the argument are working on an agreement. For now, state prison officials are giving no official reaction to this latest report, but are standing by their argument that the state has already done all the courts have asked it to do to improve Alabama's prisons. And they say now the committee is just, quote, nitpicking. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News at the federal courthouse.
A lot of folks these days are giving up leasing their telephones and buying one. And that's a good idea because it saves money. But a problem that you may run into if you do decide to buy your own phone is the wiring. Most phones these days are sold with modular cords. And when you get your phone at home, you may find that the plug here doesn't fit your wiring.
There's so many options today for customers to go out and purchase sets and equipment from other vendors. There's a variety of locations where you can buy this equipment. And in the world today, with these options that people have, they get many of their sets, they do not know how to wire them up and so forth, but they bought them at a bargain price. All the sets that are being sold today by most vendors are all modular sets, meaning that you can connect and disconnect those sets readily. You can take them with you wherever you go. In an older house where you have connecting blocks and so forth that would not accommodate the modular wiring, you would need to have modular jacks so that you could plug those sets directly in or unplug them and take them with you. All you have to do is match the colors of wires. The wires that are on here,
converting most of the older outlets to modern jacks is relatively simple. In some cases, it just requires matching and attaching colored wires. The Bell Phone Center store has most of the do-it-yourself equipment for sale and representatives to tell you what you need for your home. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
We need you in the legislature. We need you in that council chamber.
Tonight, the prayers and the calls for unity were for this man, Montgomery Councilman Donald Watkins. Mr. Watkins won't give the Montgomery County District Attorney and a special grand jury what they want: the names of police officers who he says can back up his claims of police misconduct in the Todd Road case. For this, he is being fined $500 a day. People at this rally will help him bear that cost.
So we want to stick together, and let's support Councilman Watkins. He has stood up for us, and now we need to stand with him.
Mr. Watkins has said he must protect his sources from possible retribution. Earlier today, Mayor Emery Fulmer signed an affidavit saying he won't fire, suspend, harass, or intimidate any police officer who steps forward to talk about alleged police misconduct. Mayor Fulmer did this at Representative Holmes's request, but it failed to satisfy him.
Insulting to my judicial ability, and I'm not a lawyer, but
Mr. Watkins limited his remarks, but told the crowd he had made a commitment not to sacrifice the jobs or lives of a handful of police officers.
I think what you're witnessing now is what we used to see back in ancient Roman days, where the emperor or the Caesar would kill the messenger because he didn't like the message.
Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
This, how he can have any believability anywhere again. You do have a copy of the charges that he made against the city, don't you? I don't believe Mr. Watkins can get anybody to go up and maybe I'm wrong, but this will help settle it, to go up and under oath confirm the wild allegations that Mr. Watkins publicly made.
And that the judge will ultimately see that the plaintiffs have not proven that there is a compelling cause to give the list of our members.
Well, the judge said that at this
Employee of an organization, primarily the Southern Poverty Law Center and the NAACP, to destroy the Klan through litigation. In fact, the Southern Poverty Law Center has made that statement in their own publication.